All right, we're at episode 12 of the SumerSports show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm VP of Research and Development at SumerSports. I'm joined by the CEO of SumerSports, Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, we went Monday. Great reception on our discussion of edge players. Not only that, but the two players we decided to talk about in the Monday Night Football game got a combined 4 sacks, which is wonderful. I feel vindicated in our discussion that night. How has your week been going, Thomas?
You know, I was down at our headquarters in Palm Beach and hanging out with our co-founders, and it was good hanging out talking about the next direction of this company always. And you know that. You and I talk a million times a day, so it's always about helping this our product get better. And again, I love talking football, so I'm glad we're back on a second time.
Yeah, for sure. I'm so excited for the topic that we have today because I think it really does dovetail into kind of like your expertise, which is just team building and all the great things that entails, as well as kind of in my wheelhouse, which is basically player evaluation and kind of analysis and trying to get the numbers all to work. Because this offseason, one of your former teams, the Detroit Lions, odds makers, those in Vegas and other places, they gave the Lions a preseason win total of 6.5 wins. Actually, it started at 6, right? So they said, look, we think the Lions are a 6-win team. And, and you had him on your general manager podcast, which is a great show. Brad Holmes. I felt like Brad Holmes in some of his moves had really a good clue of what was going on the last few years. Dan Campbell, a former NFL player, former tight end, part of the brethren for me, I felt like was doing a good job coaching them last year. They covered the spread in 11 of 17 games. They come out this year, and they win one of their first 7 games. Now, they had a bunch of close losses. They looked competitive in a lot of games. Really made me look foolish for going around the country prior to my time at Sumer and telling everybody to bet the Lions this year. And yet, over the last 6 games, they've won 5 of them. Their only loss was a loss on Thanksgiving around noon to the Buffalo Bills, who might be the best team in the entire NFL. And so that's given rise to a little bit of a situation, because part of the handicap for the Detroit Lions was that Jared Goff, a quarterback who was selected first overall in the 2016 draft by Jeff Fisher and the Rams, could operate a good offense if things went right. And that has happened. Goff is 9th in yards per attempt throwing. He's 8th in adjusted yards per attempt. He's 5th in net adjusted yards per attempt, which takes into account interceptions and sacks. He's even 9th in expected points added or completion percentage above expectation. That nerd composite, right? So he's played well this year. But be that as it may, without Amon-Ra St. Brown in the lineup, the offense hasn't been very good. And so I wonder if you can continue to go with a quarterback who is so dependent upon external circumstances, or do you need to, despite their success this year, Thomas, do you need to move on and try something new at the position? And I want to get your opinion because it's so hard to get that position right.
Well, there's so much to talk about again, and you always lead in so well. Before we get to that question, I want to just talk a little bit about the Lions, right? So you talk about a coordinator. How old is he, by the way, Ben Johnson? 30?
I think he's in like his mid 30s. My friend Tay Seth, who noticed astutely that he got a perfect ACT score in math when he was growing up. His parents are both math teachers. So Ben Johnson, the OC, is certainly somebody I think who's going to get some love in the future as a offensive coordinator in this league.
Well, of course, your bonds, just like you have some homer to you when you're talking about the Lions and you're talking about the Vikings. I've said that to you before. And here's the situation now with this team, which, a lot of people were down on, of course. And I've heard it at so many levels, taking the shots at Dan Campbell, taking the shots at moves being, made by Brad Holmes. And, Brad, as you mentioned, general managers, the best general managers out there and evolving general managers are the ones that know their building better than any. Right. Of course, they know the future better than any, at least projecting. So when people start throwing darts at a GM and his moves, I say, you really have to step back and look at the whole picture before you make the judgment. So back to Ben Johnson. what he's done, I think, offensively has I think, you have Jared Goff, who he's not a big progression guy. At least that's the perception. He definitely wants to get out of his hands. He's not that big time runner. No one likes to get hit, don't get me wrong, but that's definitely not his fancy, right? He wants to get it out of his hands. He wants to keep the ball alive, the drive alive and keep everything alive. And I look back, when I step back and look at these quarterbacks like Jared, who has done a good job, to your point. And again, remember, Eric, I'm very particular about verbiage, right? I know for you, it's like, it's all about the numbers, but I am. You say good, you say very good, you say excellent, or you say great. I'm particular about that. I think Jared has done a good job this year. There's nothing fancy, flashy about him. I don't look at that team when they're out there on offense thinking, wow, this is an explosive juggernaut. I look at a guy managing well. I look at a coordinator doing a really good job managing, what they have. And, when you start looking at it from a GM perspective and thinking, wow, what would I do next year? I was pretty outspoken the year that I got fired, and we were talking about Matt Ryan, and we were talking about should they draft a quarterback to wait in the wings. And I do believe you can do that. And I said it. I thought that Atlanta, and I wasn't trying to be a know-it-all, I thought Atlanta should have drafted a quarterback that year. Nothing against Pitts, but I think it's a thoughtful approach to making sure you're building for the future. My point is, I believe Detroit should look really hard at what's out there in the draft, maybe being even aggressive, because where is Detroit going to end up? If they're at 12, 13, 14, 15, I don't know where they're going to be. That's a tough spot to get the heir apparent for the rest of your regime. I think they should think seriously about drafting one, leaving him in the wings, a la Aaron Rodgers. I'm a big fan of that. Maybe not 4 years, and build. So you're not in a situation, like Atlanta this year, which is a little bit more complicated right now. And that's not a shot at Atlanta. I want to be very clear about that. We all have opinions about how we would build our team.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, in this realm, we look at Goff and, it's not just about production, right? I think this is where I think, you and I kind of, we butted heads about Baker Mayfield, for example. Now, I think you're probably more right than me as far as, is he a good quarterback? The answer is no, but was he good enough on his rookie deal? At times he was. I think Goff, when Goff was in LA, on his rookie deal, he was such a surplus that you could build a great roster around him and you could make a Super Bowl, evidently. I think that the rub is there are no middle-class quarterback contracts, to your point. And so the hard part is, he has a contract right now. Now you can go around it, but like his cap number next season is, $30.5 million. It's $31.5 million the following year. Now you can do a few things there, right? Like, you can basically take the $20 million base salary, convert it into a signing bonus, cut that thing in half and get it down to $20 million if you really want to. And I guess like part of the discussion here is going to be about what the market's like, right? Because this year we had only one first round quarterback taken, and that guy was in the late first round as opposed to early. This year, we actually have a few. Now, one of my friends and former interns, Tage Seth, comes in. Hey, I think it's the Lions' best course of action to draft somebody like Richardson or Hooker day 2 and have them sit behind Goff until they're ready. I think that that's a reasonable approach. And they do have the Rams pick, which is less valuable now that the Rams won on Thursday. But they will be able to pick, of the Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Will Levis. If they really want to go up and get that guy in the top 5 of the draft, they'll have some ammunition to do it because they'll have 2 first-round picks, the Rams and their own. Mm-hmm. But what do you think about a day 2 guy? Because the success rate on guys in day 2 has not been great.
It's not been great. And I read that, and all due respect, who was our fellow that just – who put that was Tage that just put that question in?
Yeah.
Tage, nice job, buddy. But here's what I would say. Tried and true, categorically, when you're a general manager – you are judged off of everything quarterback. People don't, you and I have argued a little bit about that. What would you pay someone and move on from them? I mean, you're judged by your owner about the quarterback, by your team, by the teammates, the players, by your assistant coaches, by the world, how you put together your team and the quarterback choices you make. And there are some good guys out there, really good GMs who have had some struggles with it, who are really good at evaluating talent. But that decision to go with a quarterback, whether it was a second day or someone not, highly regarded, again, put yourself in a GM spot when you're thinking, all right, not only do I want to win and I want to have an heir apparent here, the chances of hitting on a quarterback in those later rounds is low. Do you really want to do that and put yourself in a spot like you're not the quarterback guru? Because everyone wants to be a quarterback guru. But when you don't go after the guy, personally, I would get aggressive and go after a person that truly is adept, like Aaron Rodgers and other people who have been, in the wings. I wouldn't count on that sort of lower opportunity to capitalize on the down the line guy.
Yeah, friend of the show, Aaron Nagler, who, by the way, he hosts or he's one of the co-founders of Cheesehead TV, one of the best, in my opinion, independent fan sites that there is covering the Packers, but certainly a person who knows a little thing or two about the NFC North, and then all the way back in the day to the NFC Central. Says Thomas is spot on here. Lions done a great job collecting talent, but they'll always be limited until they upgrade a quarterback. And I think that was kind of always the case too before they got Stafford, right? Which was, they had good talent on that team. Calvin Johnson was there, right? And they had, I think, players, but ultimately what got them to the playoffs 3 times in that decade was Stafford, the quarterback who can kind of overcome a lot of things. And, Goff, I think they have a chance to make the playoffs. I put it about 20%, but it's just, even if that, like, what's going to happen? Because I want to get back to the total market a little bit as well, because this gets to what Miles Gorham says here, which is the Lions have positioned themselves in a great spot to either go and get their guy or keep building that roster for 24. The issue is that they're going to be a contender in 24, right? You look at Minnesota. Minnesota's a team that is 10-3, and I think we all believe in Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, Thomas, but that team was underdogs to the Lions in the game on Sunday because the Lions, all their underlying metrics are better than the Vikings, right? Green Bay is going to probably transition at some point from Rodgers to Love or Rodgers to somebody else sooner rather than later. And Chicago is in that space, Thomas, right, where you're building from the bottom up, right, with Fields and $100 million in cap space. But as you know, that's all great in theory until you get to the where those guys hit or not, right? Detroit has players who have hit and they have assets. And I think some Lions fans, because I went on a show yesterday, they all want to stick with Goff because I think they want to win 10 games next year. And much like their counterparts in the North, Minnesota, I think the problem is if you do that, it comes at the expense of the rest of the roster, and you could sort of see kind of the ceiling that's inherent in that.
So to that point, that analogy of it's better to be looking for a job when you have a job. It's better to be looking for a quarterback when you have one that can, is good enough. And I hate to say that because no one settles for mediocrity, back to being judged on your quarterback acquisitions. But I do believe that they can continue to grow. Now, as well as I do, and I guarantee you that Brad Holmes as a general manager is thinking, and he and Dan are having a lot of discussions about what's going on with that defense, because you can say they're going to be a contender, but they have to figure out the defense. I don't want to get off our offensive conversation, but when you're looking at that, you can be all excited about where you're going with some of this offensive element. But in the back of your mind, you go to sleep every night wondering, how are we going to improve this defense's ability? And they have some cool guys.
Good proverb here. Worst time to look for a quarterback is when you need one. I think, unfortunately, the league gives you a ton of incentive. And we talked about this with Jack Easterby last week. The league gives you a ton of incentive simply not to draft and develop. It gives you a ton of incentive to draft and play, right? And that's really tough. I agree with you though, but I'm going to push back a little bit on this idea that the quarterback discussion and the defensive discussion are independent of each other. I don't think they are, right? I think the issue is winning in the NFL requires either a great quarterback making a lot of money, like an all world quarterback, and after that the money doesn't really matter, or a quarterback on a rookie contract and then the build around, right? And the Lions are in an interesting spot, same spot as the Vikings, by the way. The Lions are in a cool spot where they're in a conference that's weak. Their quarterback, They've found some luck in that the whole offense is healthy now with Jameson Williams and the offensive line and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So everything's going well. And so that you can pick it up, right? You can pick it up and win a few games now. But long term, right? Long term is more of what happens to every team, right? Where you get an offensive lineman and gets hurt, or in the Chiefs case, Orlando Brown doesn't turn out as well as you want him to, or the defense isn't as strong, and you need a quarterback that'll be able to overcome that if he's making the $30 million cap hit, right? And unfortunately, I think it's clear that Goff isn't that player, and so you can win, right, and win a little bit in the intermediate times, but can you really win long term? And I think both of our answers is probably no, and why they probably need to go back in the draft and consider somebody. And I don't think it has to mean the end of Jared Goff in Detroit. I mean, Alex Smith, the year the Chiefs drafted Patrick Mahomes, led the NFL in passer rating and got the Chiefs a third-round pick and Kendall Fuller in a trade after that. Like, I think he can still add a ton of value to this Lions organization next year and beyond in a trade, but you have to think about the future because you don't know if the quarterback class in 24 is going to have a player in it, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't know, you just have to evaluate the situation for what it is.
So let me ask you a question as an analyst and how you would rebut this. I'm concerned Jared Goff again playing good, in our grading scale is 6. Overall, you have to look at it, right, as you're building that team and going into the future. My concern, I alluded to it earlier, and I've said it in past podcasts. If you have a quarterback that you're not sure is going to be there when it is, Kahuna cutting time, and I'm saying, like, when things get really, really dusty and dirty and it's flying around, can you step up and make the plays? Can you not only step up and make the plays, but get your ass kicked and get back up and make big plays again, push it aside? Do you have that moxie and that resiliency? Because that's what is paramount to win Super Bowls in this league and be the top echelon. And that is a concern.
One of my good friends, Rob Pizzola, to add a little bit of fun to this. Thomas, are you on a yacht? It does certainly look like a yacht. But I know that that's your home, where you're living in Atlanta there. But the kudos to making it even look like a yacht, Thomas. That's a great flex there on your end. It's so interesting. The other part that briefly, and again, this gets to team building, and I want to get the full encapsulation of this. Ben Johnson's either going to be the head coach of the Lions or he's going to be the head coach of somebody else one day, right? And this is where I fear. I actually really like Dan Campbell as a concept. In fact, if you look at the SumerSports Twitter account at SumerSports, we posted who's added the most wins above replacement among coaches in decision making, and it's some of the guys who think it's the Harbaughs, it's the Siriannis, and then there's Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell is pushing the right buttons as far as he's not taking bad timeouts, above average at least. He's going for the right fourth downs. We saw that against Minnesota. And ultimately, I think he's adding value to that team as a head coach. But the problem is whenever you have, and this is why the league is so oscillatory, whenever you have kind of a middle of the pack quarterback perform high level play, his coordinator is going to get a job. And then the guy's got to reorient himself. I mean, we see it with Mac Jones in New England. Josh McDaniels, your friend, he went to go work for Vegas, and now it's not as simple anymore, right? And I think you can attribute a lot of sophomore slumps to that as well because the coordinator gets noticed that way. Does that also impact your handicap here, which is that it's the combo? It's Ben Johnson, it's Jared Goff, it's a bunch of great offensive players combining to get you really efficient offense. And you're probably not going to have the coordinator as long as you want. So why chase the dream of Goff even further, given how probably tethered he is to that situation?
Well, look, I do like their offensive line. I mean, there are 3 really good guys there that really stoke my thoughts about the direction of where they're going with their offense, and continue to build with Ben. Again, I think there's a limiting factor with where they are right now. But again, no better time to sit there and think about the person in the wings to be able to take over when the time is right.
I actually there's a guy that I've kind of enjoyed, Anthony Richardson out of Florida. I know he's got the low floor out of him because his accuracy was simply not that great at Florida. I think a lot of drops are the reason, but he's somebody in, when Tage Seth brought up, a guy in day two. If they do go that route, let's say they wait until their pick and those top three guys go, and they have to wait until round two, he might be an option. But if I were Detroit, I would probably identify which quarterback was my favorite and trade for him in round one, and then just have him sit behind Goff. Goff does, from all accounts, look like a great teammate as well, a great leader that would actually, play the Alex Smith role, for a young player. So that one I think is a good topic, and it gets us to this situation in Arizona where a team that actually has found their franchise quarterback, right, and paid him the $46 million APY, Thomas, got them to the playoffs last year, got them to 500 or better. They were the worst offense in the league in 2018 by 0.4 of a yard per play. I mean, we're talking about a bad offense. Murray, Kingsbury, Kime, they get him to average in 2 years. They get him to the playoffs in year three. They've fallen off a little bit this year. And now Kyler Murray's hurt. It couldn't have come at a worse time. Murray has pretty modest cap hits this year and next year. It's in 2024 where the cap hit is in the 50 million range. So what does this team do? Like, I don't know necessarily if there's an easy way out of here, roster-wise.
10 seconds before we get there, we need to get Tej Seth down here, sit here. This is my invitation to him. Even if we're ever able to hire him, but we should get him down here and see how he can do on the yacht here, hanging out, and you can pepper him with questions. So keep that in mind.
Tage is great. In fact, Tage he's been a replacement person for me on my old podcast. He's absolutely wonderful. In fact, I might be a little bit nervous if he gets any airtime on the show. I might be left without a spot because he might be that good. So, well, absolutely. So, Cardinal.
To your point. And by the way, we are trying to cajole him to come down and live in Atlanta, because the more really smart football analytic people we can get in the city of Atlanta, the better it's going to be. Remember that, everyone out there. All right. Your question back to what did they do, right, Eric? That's what you're asking me, correct?
Yeah. And by the way, there's actually a report here. So we're live right now. This is a report from Ian Rappaport. Cardinals general manager Steve Keim has taken an indefinite health-related leave of absence. So this is literally down the pipe about a minute ago. So it sort of blows up a little bit of what we're trying to talk about here. Obviously, Steve's a friend of yours, and from all indications, we hope he's okay. But that, I think, does put a pin grenade into what we're trying to do.
Well, I think about that. And I do want to say, yeah, he's a very good friend of mine. I have a great deal of respect for him, as you know, and I'm, prayers are out to him, because that not only, I want everyone to know this as a GM. Yeah, you're getting paid a lot of money, but no one gives a flip about that in the heat of the battle. I'm just telling you, yeah, it's nice. You put your butt on the line with it, but the stresses that Steve Keim has been feeling this year at a lot of levels, and it's not only the stresses with the team, with a quarterback they paid a ton of money to, Cliff Kingsbury as well. So when you saw that graphic the other day with all three of those guys extended 2 through 27, head coach and GM, and then a quarterback to 28, the money that they gave a quarterback who is ostensibly dealing with some, attitudinal problems within the building, and you're a general manager, you don't think you're putting all of that on your back. You are, because your owner is looking at you saying, all right, now you were the one that endorsed this. You are not only the team builder, but you're also endorsing these. That's a lot of pressure on one man. Again, I mean, I can only imagine. I've been in situations like that before, maybe in different levels, when you're on the hot seat or not off the hot seat, and you have the pressure. So again, I hope Steve is well, and he's taking some much needed time. I know it's a little bit odd this time of year. Back to what do you do? Right now the reports are that there are 2 personnel directors that are taking over for Steve, right? There is no way that Steve is not making the decision on this along with Michael Bidwell. But what I would say right now is this is a big deal right now, because, obviously your quarterback has a ton of talent. But if your quarterback is not necessarily leading the right way, or sorry, the way that you would prefer, and you have a head coach who's at loggerheads, apparently, as we see, man, you don't have a lot of leeway here with all that money, right? So this is a high stress job, not only this year, but in the next 2 years to come. When you put that much money in, it's tough to turn around. All these people say out there, "Oh, let's move on. Let's trade Aaron Rodgers. Let's trade, this quarterback, that quarterback who's making, 40 something $million." When you make that trade, the next day your seat is as hot as you can ever imagine it. Again, as a team builder.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so hard, right? Because this is there's the Over the Cap podcast is one of my favorites in the space, because I think, Jason Fitzgerald, who I know, founder of Over the Cap, does such a good job of, distilling some of the core fundamentals of the ideas. And he said, there aren't any bad quarterback contracts. There's just bad quarterback evaluations. And I wonder if that's true, Thomas. Like, is that, like, with Kyler Murray, was it tough? Was it tough for them, because he clearly is a good enough player in a lot of circumstances to be your franchise guy. But there are aspects that you've alluded to just a second ago where it's not perfect there. Is that, I mean, is like, does that screw them over in a lot of ways, or is there a way to work around it, especially, with him coming off an ACL?
Spoken as a true owner of a analytics-driven website, right? I mean, I like his stuff and everything, but I couldn't disagree more. I'd love to get him in that spot and have him, evaluate, where the quarterbacks are. And this is not taking shot. I mean, we have a good relationship, of course, all of us, but I just disagree. When you're in that spot and you're trying to build your team and you have a quarterback that has the skills and the ability at so many levels that Kyler Murray does, it's not a bad evaluation. Right now, you have things that are folding in here that have, again, more to do with, okay, and I keep stressing the leadership side. Yes, you have to discern whether that is good enough or not, and that is on the team builders. I get it. But pure evaluation, it is really tough to walk away from a quarterback that you can't get every day, or many days you can't get. Jace, I don't know, man. That's a tough comment on that. I don't know if
I don't think it was with respect to Murray. I think it was with more respect to guys like Goff and Cousins and guys like that, where, like, I don't think it wasn't with respect to Murray. I'm trying to apply it to this situation. And I actually do agree when it comes to Goff, right? Like, if you're the Rams and you gave Goff that deal, and again, they were the best thing about the Rams was that they went, or the Eagles with Wentz, right? The Eagles are one of the smartest organizations in football, and they go and give Wentz the deal. The issue wasn't the contract, it was the evaluation of the quarterback, where it was, and I think the hardest job in football, maybe you can back me up or maybe you'll disagree, I don't think the hardest job in football from the quarterback eval perspective is drafting the right guys. I think it's determining if a guy who's been good in a rookie deal is good enough to give a veteran deal to, right? Because you're taking $45 million of surplus value away from him and then asking him to be as productive. That's a hard ask. And I think with guys like Cousins and Tannehill, although Tannehill's had success, but like the Derek Carr and Jared Goff and guys like that, the results are always mixed. And then with guys like Rodgers and Mahomes and Brady, it's never been a problem, And so I think that, and the decision to sign a quarterback is almost always, it's never a gradient, right? Is the guy worthy of the deal? Yes. Okay. Well, then we're just going to give him the top end of the market. And unfortunately, I think like that causes some issues. Now with Murray, I do think the best version of him is good enough to earn that deal. But again, I think it's up for debate, and that's really what causes, I think, some problems when the quarterback makes that much money. It's not that he makes that much money; it's that can he be a surplus at that price?
So back to our over the cap brethren, I get what you're saying purely from a numbers standpoint. I really do. I understand that. What I'm trying to say is this will always come back to quant versus evaluator, right? When you're building that team and everything is revolving around how you're putting it together, and I want to beat a dead horse here, but not only is it that, you have an owner looking at you saying, okay, this guy sells more jerseys. This guy, we market out our ears because of this quarterback being in our world. We move on from this guy, and we sign an also ran, and that's hanging over your head, as an organization, that you get rid of someone who is a proven winner. That's a really, really it's just it's a difficult conversation to have, and one to have with your owner, and to have with your head coach, and to have with the coaching staff. All of a sudden, the coaching staff is saying, are you kidding me? In this situation, Steve Keim, you would think about getting rid of this quarterback that gives us, I don't care if it's not the 9 chance, but it's, again, in our grading scale being rare. Yeah. It may be a 6.5 chance, but that's a hell of a lot better than what we're going to get in the 3rd or 4th round, and try to build off of that, man. It is just a bear to make that decision, of course.
I'm gonna test a theory I have, because this is a great question from Ashley here. Do you think that there are particular variables that would make production post rookie season more predictive and would help with that contract determination? I mean, that's the holy grail, right? I mean, and there are some stats like, clean pocket ability. There are some stats like, completion percentage over expected, which isn't necessarily the best. But I want to test one theory on you, Thomas, because I feel like it's whether or not the coach trusts him. And because we saw it on Thursday with Baker Mayfield. I actually think that the notion, can a guy come from behind in a game, is a little too outdated, because there's so many rules that help defenses. We saw it on Thursday. It's like a pass interference. It's a block, it's a roughing the passer. It's all this stuff. It's actually, the league is fairly conducive to even the most mediocre quarterbacks being down by a touchdown and being able to get one. But to me, it's when you're ahead by 1 score, does your coach trust you to throw the ball? And I think that this tracks. So among teams that have 10 or more plays where they're up by 8 or less with 4 minutes left, I know this is all like, the subsetting. The highest pass rates in football are Tampa Bay, Tom Brady. That guy crosses the bar. Mm-hmm. Bengals, Joe Burrow. That guy crosses the bar for me. The Chargers, Justin Herbert. That crosses the bar for me. Kansas City crosses the bar for me. Those are the 4 top teams in the NFL in terms of, do they let their quarterback? And that's the percentage of plays that are pass plays when you're trying to close a game out. Back to your question, back to your point. Here are the teams that are the bottom 6 teams in terms of pass rate when ahead by 1 score in the late part of the game. Las Vegas with Carr. Mm-hmm. The Giants with Daniel Jones. The Atlanta Falcons with Marcus Mariota, now benched. The Eagles with Jalen Hurts, which this is interesting because I think part of this is because they can run the football really well. The Detroit Lions with Jared Goff. And the Vikings with Kirk Cousins. Those are the bottom 6 teams in the NFL. Those are the teams that throw the ball the least when they're ahead by a score in the bottom 4 minutes of the game. So the top 4 guys, those are unquestioned franchise quarterbacks. Does the coach say, like you said, it's nut cut, but nut cutting time is different. I'm defining it differently. I'm saying we're ahead, just like the Bengals against the Chiefs. We're ahead, and all the Chiefs want us to do is run 3 times and kick a field goal so Patrick Mahomes can do his thing. And Joe Burrow's like, no, I'm ending this game with my arm, right? Bucks trust Brady, Bengals trust Burrow, Chargers trust Herbert, and the Chiefs trust Mahomes. All those other guys are kind of bottom of the guys who are like, okay, we're just lucky we're ahead right now. Don't screw it up for us, right? Goff, Cousins, Carr, Daniel Jones, Mariota. What do you think of that?
Well, my head was, where my head was going right now was, if as a general manager, if I had, for instance, you as my assistant general manager, to have a true conversation about Thomas, you have a really tough decision to make here. And it's beyond anyone who hasn't sat in that seat to really empathize until you're there. And that's not hanging over. You could say the same thing, Thomas, until you've written your doctorate on mathematics, you can't really comment about the efficacy of
I know what you're saying. You're good.
So my point is, I look back on that now, and this is a little aside. This is what we're doing at SumerSports, right? Providing the augmentation tool to boil it down, to help me as a general manager, as a former general manager, make the most the best decisions, the most thought out decisions. So I can sit there and have all of these thoughts that I've shared with you about owner stuff, about people within the building. What is my plan is another thing, right? If you're in this situation and you don't have a bona fide plan to share with your owner and to share with your head coach to keep the trifecta rolling smoothly, then man, you are staring down the barrel. There is nothing like it. You better, and if you feel in any way that there's not a good draft class coming up, and there's surely not going to be free agencies or many that you're really willing to spend the money on. And we always say this, when a guy gets out of a building, there's a reason for that. They know him better than anyone. Russell Wilson got out of Seattle for a reason, right? Not just hindsight, but there was a reason. So
Yeah.
all I'm saying to you quickly is all of that said, I just think combine what you can provide me and what I can provide my background and really, really start, the ideation on it, right? To try to determine how do we, because what I will say to you in the past is too many people in my spot have put aside what you're talking about. They're like, no, look, we have to really dig down on the football element of this. Really important, of course, brother. But to be able to combine them both, again, this comes back to, SumerSports and having an ideal situation and a tool that's going to help people make very, very sound decisions in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think this is just I think this is part of the human element to it, right? Because I think everybody in 2020 was like, hey, let Russ cook. And it made so much sense because Russ was so efficient. And then he goes to Denver. And I think we all look back and say, well, maybe Pete Carroll had a little bit of an idea of what was happening here, as far as that. And that's why I really like this. What I as somebody who follows the Minnesota Vikings a lot, growing up in Minnesota and so forth, I was always frustrated that the Vikings didn't trust Cousins at the end of games because, I was just like, you'd win more football games if you had this highly paid quarterback and you're not trusting him to win games. You're applying all your capital to this guy and you're not allocating it when it matters most. And I feel like as a general manager, there's signal in this idea of like, if I sign this player and my coach won't trust him, I'm just not going to get the maximum value out of the deal. And I think that this is a neat little, now it's not I think it's a neat way to encapsulate that. So,
can I say one last thing, which is a good segue? I know it's a little later on in our show. Coaches oftentimes, whether it's a quarterback coach or the coordinator, offensive coordinator, or even other position coaches on the offense, they think that they can coach the scheme and coach the player into being, oh, I got him, Thomas. And believe me, I've been through that before. And I've had some great friends as coaches. I'm not even talking about head coaches and others that are really tough. It's a bone of contention when you have someone in here saying, Thomas, I can make this guy a Pro Bowler year in and year out. And I'm talking about a coach because coaches have strong egos too. They think they can make the most out of this guy. So they are on another side, always pushing, which again is another load on a guy's mind, like I'm sure Steve Keim.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think it's just there's just so much there, and I feel like it's a good way, and this sort of segues to the last thing I think we should talk about, because what I like to do, as somebody who is a person who builds algorithms and tries to apply them, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of algorithm aversion, because basically, broadly speaking, algorithm aversion is just that people avoid algorithms after basically seeing one negative application of it, and so what I like is building rules of thumb that sort of people can sort of go by, as opposed to just painting out a number, right? So what I would try to do in a situation like this is just to say, I wouldn't even bring the numbers to somebody who is trying to make a decision here. I would just create the list and say, the number, I wouldn't even say the number suggested. I would be like, the coach doesn't really trust this quarterback. So what do we do about this? The past coach didn't trust this quarterback in big spots. What do we, and then, you can come to me and say, the big thing that I get pushback with is, people coming and saying, well, hey, how do you measure that? Right. We've gotten that question a lot. Hey, you're saying that you're trying to measure discipline here, but how do you even measure that? I think that there's that tension that's always going to be there. I kind of want to ask you, as somebody who has sat in that chair, has that experience, and has, real life. I mean, you're gambling oftentimes with real life decisions. that have, I can sit here in an ivory tower all I want and talk about them, but you're gambling your career on a lot of different decisions. And so like when people in that decision-making chair make decisions based upon things that are not, where they choose the human aspect of it over the algorithm aspect of it, is there a way that algorithm, math, proprietors like myself can get you to more towards that, truth?
Let me first start by saying algo aversion is real in our profession. It is. So you have to first have the person that you trust. You have to have, i.e. someone like yourself who understands enough to know that leave the pomposity or the know-it-all element aside, right? Because it goes nowhere. However, to be a teacher and to be able to teach that that general manager who is open-minded enough, Eric, and also has the time in a season to sit down and to be educated by someone like yourself and a number of these unbelievably smart, intelligent data scientists, that's the key. If you have a person who really believes in their football ability and their evaluation prowess, they are going to go down swinging of their own volition versus, 2 or 3 times in a row, something going awry on an algorithm that they don't understand. They'll forever turn their back on it. So to me, it's like any business, even the business that we're in, right? When we're stepping into a building and we're pitching our product, when the time is right, the pitch is unbelievably important. And all of our people and guys that we know, and Grant Tillis, guys like Grant Tillis, like guys like that, they know when you're in an NFL building, you have to be very strategic on how you're getting that point across to the people who ultimately make the decisions. But my point is, if you can do it tactfully enough and eloquently enough, and sometimes circuitously enough, to all of a sudden that GM and the head coach is understanding what that algorithm is truly doing, man, I think the world is your oyster. I just think we have to bring along those mid 40-something GMs and later 40-something GMs and educate them. Where is the time to do that? I ask you, how would you fit that in?
I think, and I'm gonna make a plug for this show. Like, I think that's what we're doing on Mondays, right? Like, where you and I, by the way, folks, this is the first week where we've had 2 episodes. We really thank all of you for coming. And I think, this is, what we're trying to do here, right? Because you and I the backstory on us is that, you and I worked as with PFF, I worked with a lot of the teams, and, you were the first general manager that would actually, entertain me at all. And there's an aspect of like, I've learned so much from you about how to be tactful and how to, push things forward. And you've learned from me about the math side of it. And I think to the point where, you're the CEO now of an analytics company in football, and I think you're very well suited for it. And you and I have talked through this, right? And you and I have like had awkward conversations where I'm like, hey, I think the math wasn't the best on the Julio Jones trade, but you won the trade, and that is your, one of your great achievements is drafting Julio Jones and having him be a Hall of Famer. And there are different, like, you have to be, in my opinion, and this is why somebody like me will have a limited impact on the outside at times, because what I really respect about the people in the league that I know is like you said, Brant Tillis, like he and I talk all, he and I are friends, and like, I'll ask him like, how does this work? And he's like, well, this is what you're missing at times. And like, that's such a great, thing just to have a friend who will be able to say that to you. But like, but you can tell that the people that work for teams, they live with the realities of working with teams all the time. The same way that a mathematical biologist works with the realities of the data that's given to them out in the field all the time. And I think sometimes that's lost, but through that process, you gain trust, right? You gain trust, with you watch film with scouts so that you can understand how to build metrics. That gains trust. That's something that I think will weaken algorithm aversion in the future, just the same way that you and I, built trust through working together before. And when I say something that's maybe a little flippant on my end of the spectrum, you don't take that as necessarily like disrespectful, but you take it as like, oh, well, that's a blind spot that Eric has. And I think that helps. Like, I think that the algorithm aversion goes away if you start to immerse algorithmic people into the process of true human decision making, and to a point where you get to where that's not it's a distinction without a difference.
Without a difference. Well, so Brant Tillis, yes, I mean, incredibly smart person and a great ally for you to have. And I would say to anyone out there, if you can find someone in an NFL organization that's willing to share, like Brant might. I'm not saying Brant, if you're listening, that everyone
he doesn't share that, but he just mostly answers my questions about like, hey, why am I off here? Yeah,
more that I'm just saying, if you find someone that can edify at a much bigger level, the NFL people are really particular. I don't care where they are, on the spectrum, they are really particular about ever sharing the minutia of the information. I get that. So I want to make that really clear. I just want to say to you, my point was to be positive about Brant and knowing how important that is, that there's someone like that, as smart as he is within an organization, continuing to, educate a guy like Brett Veach, who's a really good football guy and is open to learning. But this comes back to time constraints. And I really want to get back to this quickly. Finding that pocket within a year where you, let's just say hypothetically, were an assistant GM for someone. And that GM's like, man, I'll get to you. I'll get you, Eric. Well, once we get through free agency, once we get to the draft, before you know it, I'm going on my vacation. I come back and all of a sudden we're in the middle of the season. When is that time right to professionally develop with our in-house experts in that world? Because I would say when we're talking about it at SumerSports, right? Every day we're talking about our product. We're talking about building it and the evolution of the product at so many levels. And I've said this to you before, as the so-called domain expert within our building, because of having sat in this spot, I can share a lot, of course, experiential insight. I get it. What I continue to encourage people like yourself, of course, is Sean Clement and Paul Sabin and Chris Long. I mean, there's some unbelievable people. What I continue to say to them is, press me a little bit, right, Eric? I'm sorry I'm going long-winded on this. If you can press me and say, Thomas, yes, you did it A, B, and C, please look at X, Y, and Z and how you might adapt X, Y, and Z into A, B, and C on certain whatever evaluations, decision-making. You're going to make me that much better. Yeah. I'm able to do that right now because I'm not running a football team. If I'm running a football team, man, you better come up with a really, really cool tactic to get my ass in that office with you for extended period of time.
Well, and I think that's the and this is to plug SumerSports, but like, that's the reason that we're here, right? We're here because, and I thought, this was always the thing about analytics, was there were things that folks did that took a lot of their time that analytics could automate and allow for them to take their true genius and apply it more frequently. Right. And so, if you're spending, like, let's say pre-draft, you're spending a month creating 30 draft scenarios that you go through, right? And you get really good at those, but it's really only 1% of the entire draft space. Then you're not having time to do other things, right? And so analytics can certainly help you populate more of those, right? And help you in that realm. I think that, yeah, it's absolutely. And then, so from my perspective, it's absolutely true. And like, this is one of the reasons, like, with all my, with my contacts, it's just like, it has to be mutually beneficial. Like, you can't just take. You have to be like, look, this is a player that I think is really cool. Can you, really good. Can you tell me, and again, this is, not to anybody in particular, but I'll just spam a few, phone messages and say, hey, I found this guy in my analysis. Is he good? And a lot of times it's like, Eric, there's a character flaw, or Eric, that this guy's got a medical. And sometimes it's, oh yeah, I had to take a second look at that guy. He's pretty damn good. And like, so, my advice, of course, is to get that owner's attention, or to get the GM's attention, is to provide value, like in your normal job, and then, gain trust. And it's just like with anything, as you gain trust, obviously there's more opportunity there for you to have a seat at the table. And then again, it's all about communication. Like I would say, what makes, what we hope that this podcast brings to people is not only great information, but great information brought to you in a perspective that you can ingest. And that's why I think having your perspective and my perspective melded together really helps span the space there, because communication is the biggest thing. Like if you're sending people Excel spreadsheets, they're not gonna read them. Like I just don't think that's going to be the case.
Well, if I may, on my last point, all that was great. The transitioning, within our league in the next 10 to 15 years, you're going to have, again, that wave of younger GMs, or maybe then in the next 10 or 15 years, of 45-year-olds are going to be so much more inclined to, again, whether they're working side by side with a quant as their assistant GM, or that guy may be the GM and the football guy may be in certain places, maybe the supporting football guy, domain expert. What I'm saying, that transition time is now. And if you're not open-minded enough in the businesses that are being run out there, that are being, third parties, and you're just expecting the group right now who has been doing what they've been doing for 25 and 30 years to change their way of thinking, it's not going to happen. These are really, really important times during this transition time. You guys are young. Our whole group at SumerSports, I feel, is in their mid-30s. I mean, there is so much cool space there. It's going to be really, really interesting. You get the guy who's in his 50s, he's not necessarily that concerned about that. If he's a GM right now, he's like, look, I've had people tell me this before in our GM advisory committees. People I respect beyond, I don't know if I shared it with you, literally said to me a few years ago, Thomas, I can't think about that. I'm only going to be around for the next 3 or 4 years in this business anyway. Do not knock on my door to try to get me to spin around and turn into an analytic approach. So we have to be smart about how we approach it.
Yeah, and especially from the GM chair, there, not that many guys get multiple jobs, and so you're just trying to hang on to the one you have for as long as you have. And I certainly get that. And in fact, there's actually some analytics even around that I think we can help folks with as they move throughout their career. But this has been great. I do have to apologize. We're not going to get to every question, but I do, so many great people that came with us live. Craner, Alex, Stanford, Sam. Of course, we had earlier questions from Fraser, who's been and Miles, who have been, loyal listeners too. So we really do appreciate all of you coming. Hopefully we can continue to grow this show and continue to approach topics with this kind of depth and breadth. So, and again, like, Thomas said, our thoughts are with Steve Keim, because, obviously it takes a lot of, it takes, I think, real courage to leave a job to take care of your health. So we hope just for the best for him. And so for Thomas
and
Dimitroff.
Mike Leach, can I just say, I'm sorry to
yeah. Oh, yeah.
One of the really good guys. I knew him all the way back in the Valdosta State days with Hal Mummy. And I know over the years, he wasn't that happy with some of the quarterback, drafting of some of his quarterbacks, but a quality guy, and God bless him on his journey. Yeah.
And just to give out a recommendation for all of you that are kind of looking at things in the space, like S.C. Gwynn wrote a great book called The Perfect Pass that came out in about 2015, 2016. It was one of my favorite books I've ever read about football. It goes through, the Lavelle Edwardses and the Hal Mummies and the Miles Davises and the all the way out to Mike Leach and those guys. And it's a terrific read. The football world just lost an angel this week. And obviously, we hope to all leave a legacy that's going to live as long as Mike Leach is going to live in the football world for sure. So awesome. And thank you for pointing that out. I forgot to do so. So this has been episode 12 of the SumerSports Show. So for Thomas Dimitroff, I'm Eric Eager. We hope to see you on Monday.